Brad Pitt stepped out of the side door into the cool night air of downtown Los Angeles, the distant sound of traffic humming like a city breathing in its sleep. His charity appearance had gone well, handshakes, flashes, polite applause, but he felt worn out. Not from the people, but from the noise of being seen too much. He pulled his black cap lower, zipped his plain jacket to the collar, and kept walking past a line of parked cars and alley walls tagged with fading graffiti. No entourage, no headlines, just a man looking for 5 minutes of peace. That's when he heard it, not laughter. Not really. It was sharper, shrill, performative. The kind of sound people make not from joy but from power they think they've earned. Brad slowed, instinct rising before reason. The noise was coming from a small courtyard tucked behind a trendy cafe he'd passed earlier. Strings of yellow bulbs hung overhead, giving the space a warm glow that clashed violently with the ugliness it was lighting up. 6 young men stood in a loose, mocking circle. They were the kind of guys who dressed like they were always auditioning for something: designer sneakers, gold chains, exaggerated gestures. In the center sat a man in a wheelchair. Thin, still, glasses askew on his nose. His body leaned slightly to the side, not from choice but condition. His face didn't carry anger. Only something quieter. Something like grief. One of the guys bent low and clapped inches from the man's face. "Hey! You even in there, bro?" Another danced in front of him, flapping his arms with cruel imitation. A third aimed his phone and laughed, "Yo, get this, he looks like a glitching NPC." Then one of them, with dyed blonde hair and mirrored shades still on at night, crumpled a fast food wrapper and tossed it into the man's lap. "Smile, man," he shouted. "You're famous now." Laughter exploded again. Brad moved without thinking. Not quickly. Not dramatically. Just, forward. He stepped through the edge of the circle, placing one hand firmly on the shoulder of the nearest guy. The young man jerked around, annoyed. "What the hell?" He froze. His words fell apart the moment he saw Brad's face. Even in a cap and jacket, there was no mistaking him. The square jaw. The sharp eyes. The quiet that followed him like gravity. "What's your problem, man?" the guy muttered, now suddenly smaller than his own voice. Brad didn't blink. "My problem," he said evenly, "is that you need to see who you've become." The circle cracked. One by one, the rest of them turned toward him. Some laughed nervously. One adjusted his phone like he was about to film. But no one spoke. Then Brad raised his voice, not a shout, but something sharper. "This is strength to you? 6 of you humiliating one man in a chair. Taunting him like it makes you matter." His finger cut through the air, pointing at each of them. "You think that's power?" Footsteps echoed in the distance. A few pedestrians stopped, drawn by the sound of something real. People started recording, but now, the lens was aimed at them. At Brad. At the circle. At the truth of what was happening. One guy snorted. "Dude, it's just a joke. Chill." Brad stepped forward, his voice now like iron. "No. This isn't a joke. It's your fear, dressed up as entertainment. Your emptiness turned into content. And you think likes will make it less pathetic?" Silenced, he turned and knelt beside the man in the wheelchair, gently placing a hand on his shoulder. The man trembled slightly but didn't flinch. "I'm sorry," Brad said, his voice low now. "Not for them. For all of us who ever walked past and said nothing." The man didn't speak. But his eyes filled, slow, steady, and real, not from pain, but from the shock of finally being seen, and defended. And around them, the circle of cruelty began to collapse. The silence after Brad's words was heavier than any insult that had been thrown. One of the guys, the tallest, looked away, pretending to check his phone, but his hands were shaking. Another laughed quietly to himself, a dry, shallow sound, the kind you make when you don't know what else to do and panic has nowhere to hide. The one with the gold chain, the loudest of them all, took a step back. He looked at Brad, then at the man in the wheelchair, and for a moment, something flickered across his face. Recognition. Regret. Maybe even shame, but none of them said a word. Brad stood up slowly. He didn't raise his voice again. He didn't need to. You think this makes you strong? Brad said, his eyes sweeping the circle. You're not men. You're noise. Cowards who perform cruelty to fill the space where character should be. His voice wasn't angry now. It was disappointed. And somehow, that hit harder. One of the younger guys, barely older than a teenager, looked like he wanted to cry. I didn't do anything, he mumbled, eyes darting around as if searching for a way out. I was just watching. Brad turned to him. And that's the problem, he said softly. You didn't do anything. Another man, standing at the edge, dropped his phone into his pocket and turned to walk away, muttering under his breath. Brad didn't stop him. He wasn't there to humiliate anyone. That would have made him one of them. Instead, he turned back to the man in the wheelchair. What's your name? Brad asked gently. Eli, the man said quietly, his voice hoarse, but steady. Brad nodded. You okay, Eli? Eli blinked. I am now. Those 3 words landed like stone in the pit of everyone's stomach. By now, a small crowd had formed just outside the courtyard. People stood in silence, some holding their phones, others just standing with wide, troubled eyes. A woman in her 20s wiped her cheek. A man in a suit shifted uncomfortably and looked down. The courtyard didn't feel like a social space anymore. It felt like a courtroom. But not for punishment, for reckoning. Then, unexpectedly, one of the 6 stepped forward. The guy with mirrored shades. He took them off, his voice shaking. I didn't mean for it to go that far, he said. We were just messing around. Brad didn't move. He's not a toy, he said. He's a human being. The man looked at Eli. Really looked. I'm sorry, he said, softer now. I'm sorry, man. That was messed up. Eli gave a small nod. Nothing dramatic. But it was enough. Brad turned to the others. Any of you planning to keep pretending this was okay? No one answered. He stepped away from Eli and stood still for a moment. Not preaching. Not posing. Just standing, letting the weight of what had happened sit exactly where it belonged. Then he looked at Eli again. Need a ride home? Eli's lips quirked up, just slightly. I wouldn't mind the company. Brad gently took the handles of the wheelchair and began to push, and as they moved through the courtyard, past the silent onlookers and the now scattered group of men who thought they were untouchable, no one said a word, because they all knew, something had cracked open. Not just in the moment but in them. And Brad, he didn't look back. That he wasn't walking away from anything, that he was walking towards something better and making sure Eli got there, too. The night air felt different now, cooler, cleaner, as if something rotten had been exhaled from the courtyard and carried off by the wind. Brad pushed Eli's wheelchair slowly down the sidewalk, the city murmuring around them. Car horns. Neon lights. A couple arguing in the distance. But for a stretch of a few blocks, it all felt quiet. Not because the world had stopped, but because they had. Neither of them spoke for the first few minutes. Brad didn't ask questions. He didn't fill the silence. He just walked behind Eli, guiding the wheels over cracks in the pavement, careful not to bump him too hard. Finally, Eli said, You didn't have to do that. Brad's voice was quiet. I did. Eli tilted his head. Because you're famous? Brad gave a short laugh. No. Because I'm human. Or at least, trying to be. Eli nodded slowly. Most people just watch. I know, Brad said. I've watched too, before. I know what that kind of silence feels like after. Eli's eyes traced the shadows on the buildings. Tonight could have been worse. Brad tightened his grip on the chair handles. But it wasn't. They reached a crosswalk, waited for the signal, then moved again. Brad noticed Eli's hands, long, thin fingers resting on the armrests, slightly trembling. Not from fear, but from the adrenaline that still lingered. You used to walk, didn't you? Brad asked carefully. Yeah, Eli said. Spinal injury. Construction accident. 5 years ago. He smiled faintly. I was carrying a bag of concrete when the platform gave out. Woke up in a hospital bed, staring at a ceiling tile I still see in my sleep. Brad's jaw tightened. I'm sorry. I'm not, Eli said. Not anymore. At first, yeah. I was bitter. Angry at everyone who looked away. Everyone who stared too long. But tonight, he looked back at Brad, tonight reminded me that sometimes someone does stop. And that makes all the difference. They turned down a quieter street, toward a row of small apartment buildings. Eli pointed to one with a faded blue door. That's me. Brad helped him up the short ramp to the front entrance, then paused. Eli reached into his pocket, pulled out his keys, and unlocked the door. Before going inside, he turned back. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why you? Out of all the people walking by, why were you the one who stepped in? Brad looked down for a moment, searching for the right words. When I was a kid, he said slowly, I saw someone getting jumped outside a gas station. 3 against 1. The man was begging, crying. And I just watched. I was scared. But that image never left me. He met Eli's eyes. I promised myself that if I ever saw someone alone like that again, I wouldn't be. Eli stood silent for a moment. Then nodded, eyes misting again. I hope more people make promises like that. Brad smiled. Me too. Eli offered his hand. Brad shook it firm, grounded. No press, no flash, no performance. Just two men holding something real for a moment. Good night, Brad. Good night, Eli. And hey, next time someone messes with you, tell them Brad Pitt's your backup. Eli chuckled. I will. The door closed gently behind him. Brad turned and walked back toward the city, the echo of his footsteps soft against the pavement. He didn't know who had recorded what tonight, what clips might appear on social media, or whether his name would trend by morning. That he didn't care, because sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do, is stop being a witness, and start being someone's reason to believe in people again. The city had quieted by the time Brad turned the corner, leaving Eli's apartment behind him like a warm ember burning quietly in the dark. Streetlights flickered above the cracked sidewalks, and shopfronts wore their metal shutters like armor. The buzz of downtown LA had faded into something deeper, a kind of stillness that only came after something true had happened. Brad walked alone, but he didn't feel alone, not tonight. His phone vibrated in his pocket for the 5th time in the last hour. He didn't take it out. He knew what it would be: texts, missed calls, maybe already headlines. The moment had been filmed, he'd seen it. He'd looked out into the crowd of bystanders and seen at least a dozen phones raised, fingers trembling as they tried to capture a confrontation they hadn't had the courage to interrupt themselves, and he'd let them, not because he wanted attention, but because maybe the people who needed to watch it most weren't there in person. Maybe they'd be on their couches tomorrow, scrolling with half a heart, and stop. And see. And feel something they hadn't let themselves feel in a long time. That he kept walking, hands in his jacket pockets, not toward home but toward nowhere in particular. Past closed diners and sleeping flower stalls. Past the very courtyard he'd left an hour ago, now empty. The string lights above were still on, casting a glow over the same cracked pavement where Eli had sat. But the laughter was gone, only memory lingered. Brad paused, looked up at those lights, and saw it all again: the way the guys circled like predators pretending to be comedians, the phone screens gleaming like teeth. And Eli, not crying. Not begging. Just, still. Like a man who'd endured this far too many times to be shocked anymore. That was what haunted Brad most, not the cruelty, but how normal it had clearly become. That he sat down on a bench across from the courtyard. Let the quiet in. Let the ache stay a while. He remembered the man at the gas station again. The one from his childhood. The helplessness in his voice. The shame in Brad's chest when he walked away. He'd only been 13. But that moment had followed him into every dressing room, every red carpet, every night he lay awake knowing the world praised his face but didn't know his past. That he whispered aloud now, just to the air, I didn't walk away this time. A gust of wind swept through the alley, lifting scraps of paper like a silent applause. His phone buzzed again. This time, he pulled it out. One text stood out from his publicist. This is everywhere. You should see the comments. People needed this. He stared at the message for a long moment. Then opened his browser and typed his own name into the search bar. The first video was already at 2 million views. Brad Pitt stops bullying of disabled man. Full video. He tapped play. It felt strange to watch himself from the outside, to see the way his hand landed on the kid's shoulder, the turn of the face, the exact moment when the laughter died. His voice came through the speakers, clear, unwavering. You need to see who you've become. Brad paused the video. That was the line, that was the one that had shifted everything. That he scrolled through the comments. Thousands of them. This broke me. I cried watching this. Thank you, Brad. I wish someone had done this for my brother. Humanity isn't dead. I've been that guy in the chair. I've been the one who said nothing. Not anymore. And then one comment that made his breath catch. His name is Eli. He saved me too. Brad sat back on the bench, the phone resting in his palm like a quiet heartbeat. Somewhere, Eli was asleep, maybe dreaming, maybe still sitting awake wondering if it had all actually happened. Somewhere, the 6 guys were likely having their own reckoning privately or not. Maybe they'd laugh about it. Maybe they'd forget. But maybe, one of them wouldn't. Maybe one of them would feel what Brad felt at 13, and decide to break the pattern. That he stood slowly, stretching. The night was nearly over. As he walked again, this time finally heading home, he passed a mural painted along the side of a building. It was old and faded, but the words across it still shone bright under the street lamp. We rise by lifting others. Brad smiled. Not a smile for cameras. Not one for show, just one for himself. And as he disappeared down the sidewalk, one man among millions, there was no applause. No spotlight, only a choice he would make again. And again, because being human wasn't a role. It was a decision, every single day. By the time the sun crested over Los Angeles, the world had already changed. The video had exploded overnight. It wasn't just on entertainment blogs or social media reels. It had slipped into morning news broadcasts, international headlines, ethics panels, group chats between high school teachers and students, whispered conversations in office cubicles. It didn't trend because Brad Pitt was in it. It trended because he wasn't the center. The moment was. The truth was. One man in a wheelchair. 6 boys with laughter sharper than knives, and someone who finally said, enough. The internet was flooded with the phrase, you need to see who you've become. It wasn't a slogan. It was a mirror, and people were staring into it and flinching. In that moment, what Brad had done didn't feel like heroism. It felt like correction. A long overdue recalibration of what it meant to be human in a world drunk on performance and numb to presence. But Brad didn't wake to applause. He didn't wake to headlines. He woke to silence and his own racing thoughts. He sat in his kitchen in sweats and a faded t-shirt, the blinds still drawn. His phone had 123 unread messages. Calls from agents, producers, friends, strangers. His inbox was overflowing with invitations, requests, interviews, panel discussions, offers to speak at conferences on empathy and social responsibility. But none of that moved him. He scrolled through one email thread, subject line, urgent CNN plus GMA appearance request today. He deleted it. Instead, he opened a text from an unknown number. Short. Unfiltered. I used to be one of those guys. Watching. Laughing. Last night I cried. I don't know how to fix it. But I want to try. He stared at the screen. For a long time. Then whispered out loud, good. That was the point, not to punish, not to destroy, but to interrupt. To place a human hand right in the path of cruelty and say, no more. His thoughts drifted to Eli. The weight of that moment. The way he had sat, frozen not from fear, but exhaustion. The kind that comes when you've spent your whole life absorbing what no one wants to admit still exists. Ableism that smiles. That films. That goes viral. Brad picked up his phone and typed a new message. Eli, I don't think you realize how many people you gave a voice to just by existing in that moment. You didn't ask for that. You didn't perform for it, but you carried more courage and stillness than any of us had in motion. Let's talk soon. Not because of the video. Because we're not done. He hit send, then he stood, stretched, and walked to the window. Pulled back the blinds. Outside, two neighbors were talking on the sidewalk. A kid on a skateboard passed by. A woman in a wheelchair wheeled herself across the crosswalk, holding a grocery bag between her knees. Brad watched. He wondered, how many more Elis were out there right now enduring what the world pretended wasn't happening, not just cruelty, but indifference. He remembered a quote he once heard but never forgot: the opposite of love is not hate, it's apathy. The video didn't go viral because Brad was in it. It went viral because apathy, for once, had been shattered. Later that day, he finally agreed to a single interview, not with a major network, but with a young journalist from a local independent magazine. They met in a public park. No security. No handlers. No entourage. Just two people on a bench. The reporter's first question was expected: why did you do it? Brad's answer was not, because I remember who I was when I didn't. And I never want to be that man again. She paused. Then asked softly, and what do you hope comes from this? He didn't blink. That next time, it's not me, that someone else steps in, that the man in the chair never has to feel small again, that the boys who laughed remember how they felt when the laughter stopped, and maybe one day, they're the ones who stop it next time. The reporter didn't say anything. She just nodded and turned off the recorder. That night, Brad sat in his backyard under a canopy of stars. No cameras. No scripts. Just the silence of a man who knew he had done one good thing: not to erase the past, but to rewrite someone's future. And somewhere, Eli was out in the world, still rolling forward. Still existing. Still whole, but this time, he wasn't invisible. This time, he wasn't alone, and that was enough.